McGillicuddy and Murder's Pawn Shop, Season 3, Episode 5, The Origin of the China Eye. October 15th, 1921. Continued. Oh, diary. I did not think. I did not breathe. I smell a human girl, the whiskerlet repeated. I saw my whole life flash before my eyes. This was it. This was the end. This was the part where I said, "Ta-ta, life, it was nice knowing you." Did I know, when I was a little girl skipping down the lane and sucking on a peppermint stick, that my death was going to be in an alien cave, killed by horrible plague mask creatures? I wanted to think that I could be brave and fight back, but the idea was ridiculous. There were 12 of them, and I had no weapon, and my best trait, my ability to teleport, didn't work. What can I do? I thought. Is there anything I can do? My best option at the moment seemed to be to freeze. So I froze. I lay on my side and stared as intently as I could at the knees of the whiskerlets, begging them not to come any closer. "You smell a human girl?" one said. My blood began to pound. I heard the soft scrape of the whiskerlet's feet as one walked towards me. I heard sniffing. Sniff, sniff. My heartbeat seemed to slow, like an ominous drum in the pit of my stomach. "I think you are mistaken, Seven," a whiskerlet said. "Oh, yes, Seven, you are very much mistaken. Please go away." "I am not," Seven said. "I think." And he surged suddenly towards me. I jerked, instinctively. My skin went hot all over, and then the sniffing began to descend. Sniff, sniff. I saw the tip of a bird beak, and then, with a swoop, both glittering eyes were staring at me. I didn't move. "I see you," the whiskerlet said. "Come out into the light. Come out, mouse." They moved the barrels. So courteous of them. I slid my legs out, and jelly-like stood. "What are you doing in our domain?" This was it. The worst had happened. The best thing I could hope for was that Wrath had been wrong about them, and they were about to offer me tea and cookies, and we would sit down for a nice chat, regarding the eccentricities of our species. I stood there, and I did feel like a mouse. I felt small and squeaking, shabby and dirty. I felt like prey. I felt like they were all staring at me, taking their time, waiting to pounce. "I don't know how I got here," I said. "You don't," the whiskerlet said. "I don't," I said. "I touched a golden eye, and all of a sudden I was here." "A golden eye? An eye?" "We do not use eyes," the whiskerlet responded in outrage. "We detest eyes." "Well, that's very interesting," I said. I needed a plan. I wasn't going to give up yet. I needed some way out, some idea. What I needed was a murder object, because my heart told me they would work, even down here. But I didn't have a murder object. I made a promise to myself to start carrying one always in my pocket to get out of these dastardly situations in the future, assuming I got out of this one in the first place. I was a fool to imagine that there would be a murder object lying around on the whiskerlet's tables and benches. I had touched nearly everything here. You are not a murder object, diary, and I cannot use you. Besides, I don't think that things in pockets count, so even if someone gurgled to death in front of me, I doubt you would ever become a murder object. So I had nothing at all. No way to get back. No way to get away from the plague-masked doctors who were going to kill me. "I know that you're startled to see me here," I said, "but I'm not an enemy, really. I find you fascinating." I edged into the center of the group, to get as far away as possible from their gloved hands. "I wish you no ill will." And then, all of a sudden, diary, I had it. I was sure I had it. Whiskerlets didn't like eyes. That was odd. But it had started the gears of my brain spinning. I need a murder object. I didn't have anything with me. No buttons, not you. What I needed was something, anything, from McGillicuddy and Murder's pawn shop, because I knew now that everything in the pawn shop was a murder object. If I had anything from that place, I should be able to use it to get somewhere else. Have you figured it out, diary? Do you realize now what I had in my possession all along? I am so interested in you, I said, that I've even been taking notes and writing poems about you here in this diary. I drew you out of my pocket diary and held you in both hands. I'll show you. Look. There was silence from the Whiskelets. They stared at me with glittering, cold eyes. They didn't even move, didn't even cock their heads. For a moment, I had the impression that they were all dead, suspended and staring at me, like corpses hovering an inch above the ground. There was a carelessness in their limbs. They seemed to bob and sway. I felt like if I looked into those eyes for another second, I would go mad. I fumbled at your spine, diary, tried to slide my fingers into your leather backing. My heart rate increased, and I felt like the Whiskelets were getting closer, zooming in on me, their bulbous eyes getting larger. But for the time being, I said to the Whiskelets, I am sure you want me out of your presence, so allow me to just... And then I got it. I slid my broken china eye out of your leather spine. Imagine how silly I would have felt if that hadn't worked. But it did work. Whoosh. The eye was a murder object. I had been right, and I can't believe I've never thought of it before. I had never had so much fun teleporting, never in my life. I felt like a kid on a carnival ride. The weird whipping feeling in the pit of my stomach felt like flying on a swing. I tumbled to earth and found myself in a sweet, white and black and blue kitchen, with a white and black checkered floor. I smelled butternut squash. I smelled butter. I smelled human life, and I'd never been happier to be alive in my own world. Never. I looked around then, and I was faced with the awful truth that this was in fact a murder object. A man was lying dead on the tiles to the left of me. He was wearing a dinner jacket, in the style of about 1914. His left leg was crumpled, and for a moment I thought maybe he'd just passed out drunk, sprawled out on the floor. There was a dewy, frumpled look to his clothes. He looked like he'd been partying. His cummerbund had come undone and was lying on the floor. I stooped. "Are you all right?" I whispered. But I was being ridiculous. The man was dead. That was the whole point. My eye was a murder object, and here was my murder. I rolled him over gingerly. I wanted to check for blood. There was no blood, and I realized that he must have been poisoned. A teacup lay broken underneath him. Given his state, I would have expected it to be a champagne flute or a wine glass, but it was a teacup, and coffee had been spilled everywhere. Someone had been trying to sober him up. His shirt was drenched with brown, dark coffee. My eyes quickly moved away from his stained front, however, and instead moved to the shattered teacup on the floor. It was pale and white, thick for a teacup. But the design... It was a white cup, with a single bright blue eye staring out of the center. The way the teacup had broken, well, it had smashed perfectly. The eye was left intact, on its own. I picked it up. It was my china eye, exactly. The same grooves, the same edges. I had at last found where my china eye had come from, and it hadn't been part of a face. It had been a single staring eye on the surface of a teacup. I did an odd thing then, diary. I put the new china eye in my pocket. I felt a wave of comfort wash over me suddenly. The Whiskelets couldn't follow. I had taken the murder object with me, tucked into your spine. I was completely safe. I was stuck in the wrong time, but I was completely safe. That felt good, for the moment. It allowed me to calm down. I had time, suddenly, plenty of time. I could figure out what to do next, without the pressure of being ground into powder. Just as I was wondering what to do next, the kitchen door swung open and a woman walked in. She blinked at me. I blinked at her. She had a kind face and dark hair. Her eyes swept to the body on the floor, then back to me. "Is it John?" she said, in a quiet voice. "I don't know who it is," I said. I got to my feet, feeling shaky. "My name is Melinda Maudie Merkel, and I've just used an old murder object." I blinked suddenly. This woman might have no idea what I was talking about. She probably didn't. Did I have any reason to believe that she was a magic unusual? But to my relief, she didn't seem shocked by the words. She left the doorway and then moved further into the kitchen. As she passed, I heard light-hearted laughter coming from another room. There was a party here, a gathering of some kind. She strode across the room on short high heels, then squatted. She looked at the man's face. "It is John," she said. She gazed at his face, sorrowful. "We knew they were coming for him, but we didn't think it would be tonight." She looked up at me. "Are you one of the new group? Those night enthusiasts?" "I have a soul," I said. She frowned. She didn't understand. "I can prove I'm from the future," I said. "Here." I held out the new china eye, and I showed her my original. They lay in my hands, one in each palm, like my hands were staring up at her. "Oh, I see," she said. She nodded. "What time are you from?" 1921. "So not long." She stared down at the teacup. "I'm sorry it got smashed. I like that set." I realize that's a strange thing to be thinking about, but I'm in shock. "We knew he was going to die soon. He's been mad, mucking about with the night enthusiasts, making them angry, but I didn't think it would happen tonight." She looked up and offered her hand. "My name is Mara. I have to tell the others now. Will you come with me?" I nodded. Like a woman in a trance, Mara left the kitchen and headed into a parlor. I felt incredibly strange walking after her, especially since my fashion suddenly seemed a bit daring. There were 7 people in the parlor. Men and women in their 30s. They were drinking coffee out of the same set of china. Blue eyes stared out of their teacups. My gaze swept the group, and suddenly my stomach dropped into the floor. One of the men was Wrath. Wrath. He was smiling, grinning to one side, with a twinkle in his eyes. He looked young and smart and put together. He had a human face. He was quite handsome without the puppet eye. He looked like someone you would trust to the end of the earth, someone you knew would come through for you. As soon as Mara and I entered, the conversation ceased. To have a complete stranger walk into your parlor is one thing, but to have your friend look as pale as death alongside her is another. Wrath rose. "Mara?" he said. "Hester," she said. "Elizabeth Alonzo." "It's John. John is dead." Mara finally sat down and started to sob. At first I thought her reaction had been strange, maybe even suspicious, but I realized then that it said more about her character than anything else. She was one of those people, and I think I am sometimes like this too, that, when faced with a crisis, she is calm as the eye of a hurricane. The more traumatic the scene in front of her is, the more quiet and iron-like she becomes. Now that other people were facing John's death, however, Mara seemed to find the space to break. I sat down at the end of one of the sofas, feeling strange. My heart and soul seemed to recognize this time, the colors, the smells in the air. I was out there somewhere. Maybe even 6 or 7 blocks away. If the night enthusiasts were here, it meant that this was my same city. Little teenage Maud was off somewhere having a giggle. The thought made me a bit dizzy. And Wrath, Hester, I should call him Hester. Hester was right here, and he had no idea what was going to happen to him. Most of the group got up and went into the other room. I could hear them murmuring. One of them cried out aloud, just once, as if the weight of what had just happened had finally hit them. Mara stayed in the room with me. After a minute of sobbing, she quieted. She poured herself a cup of coffee with shaking hands and took a sip. "Would you like any coffee?" she said. "Please don't worry about me," I said. Mara pressed her hand against her nose and mouth. "He just got here. He was drunk. We told him to drink some coffee and keep quiet in the kitchen until he was ready to talk. He had just been at a party with that new group that's making us all nervous, the night enthusiasts." She looked at me sharply. "You know about them. Are they still around in 1921? "Yes," I said. "How much do you know about them now?" "Nothing," she said. "They're new. And I hated their leader in school. He was always mean to me as a boy. Well, they say they're going to bend the bounds of magic, and they've become very aggressive, recruiting with a zeal that makes me nervous. John rather liked the look of them, and he was going over to a new party they were having to check them out. He just wanted to know more." She started to cry. "I don't know why he's dead." Mara seemed certain that this coffee hadn't been poisoned. She was drinking it. I suddenly wanted to take it away from her. I didn't know a lot about poisons, but I didn't think they took long at all. The man had died in this kitchen. Had he really been poisoned by a night enthusiast? Could a poison have taken that long to set? Possibly. Perhaps it was a magic poison, magically delayed. Such a thing could exist. Or had he been poisoned by someone here? Had the entire pot of coffee been poisoned? "Mara," I said. "Why did you come here?" she said. She wiped her eyes. It wasn't accusatory. "Did you need help with something? How did you get that eye?" I decided to drop the coffee for now. She seemed to trust it. It was probably all right. I rolled my eyes toward the ceiling in a plea for help. There was so much to start with, all at once. "Do you know anything about the death to all mice, Whiskalits?" "The what?" she said. I sighed. It's all right, no one has. Except for me, and my uncanny ability to see the phrase, "death to all mice," written on the wall when no one else could. Do you have any means of getting to the future?" I said. Mara leaned forward, intrigued. So I told her everything. I left out Wrath, but I told her about the Death to All Mice cave, and my need to get back to 1921. She leaned back. "I don't have a way to get into the future, but I think you could get into your own timeline from here, since you should be able to use this technique to return to your time of origin." "What is it?" I said. She stood up. "It's my magic unusual power. It feels quite useless to me, since all it can do is create a teleportation, which we can do already, but the drawing might take you into the future. I enchant jelly. If you draw the symbol of an eye with it on the wall, you can touch the symbol to be transported. You have to think of the place you want to go while you draw the eye." "That was how I got into the cave of the Whiskalits," I said. "A drawing of an eye." "I know," Mara said. "I find that interesting." She stood up, but my insides squirmed, and I stood up too. "Can I speak to Hester before I leave?" I said. She looked at me, stunned. "You know Hester? Why on earth didn't you say anything?" "It's complicated," I said. "I know him from the future." "Oh, of course," she said. "I'm not thinking straight. Why say anything if he doesn't know who you are?" She paused, and then a dark look came over her eyes. "He has a wife in the future. Do you know me?" I didn't say anything. "Hester and I are engaged," Mara said. "Do you not know me?" "I know Hester very little," I said. "I wouldn't have met you in the future." "Oh," she said. A weight seemed to be lifted from her chest. "Well, very well then, I'll call him in. Hester!" Hester entered, looking a bit suave and devilish. He swept Mara's hand up and kissed it. "Are you holding up all right?" he said. "Don't flirt with me," Mara said. "John's dead." Hester's face fell and he nodded. He sat down on the sofa. "What's going on?" He looked towards me with a smile. "Hester," I said, "I'm from the future, and I feel it's my duty to warn you. You should stay away from the night enthusiasts, completely. In about 2 or 3 years, you're going to be put inside a murder object by them. It's going to make you go mad. You'll be the first person to ever be released from one, and you'll live. But you'll be changed. Don't go near the night enthusiasts." I got dizzy for a minute. A nasty, I'm going to be sick dizzy. I felt like I'd just been spun around very fast. I looked towards Hester to see how he'd taken the news of his one day becoming Wrath, but he was sitting down on the couch again. "What's going on?" He looked towards me again with a smile, the exact same way he'd smiled before. I tried to tell him again. Again, I felt dizzy, and seemed to go back a few seconds in time. "What's going on?" Hester said, for a third time. "I'm trying to warn you," I stammered. "Ah," Hester said. "I thought you said you were magic unusual," Mara said. "I am," I said. "But not for more than a few months." "Oh," Mara said, "but you can't warn us about anything. We cannot change past events when we use murder objects. We can't. There's a magic that binds things in place." I stared at Hester, and I felt sick. "Very well," I said. "It's nothing to stress about. You'll find out on your own soon, and everything will be all right." "We appreciate you trying," Hester said. He smiled and left Mara and I alone. "I'll try that portal spell now, if you don't mind," I said. She nodded. She returned with a small jar full of golden, glowing liquid. She handed it to me. "I can make lots more," she said. "You can keep this." It's just oil and fragrance. I enchant it myself. I took the jar from her. Where should I draw the symbol? I said. Just here, on the wall. I uncorked it and dipped my finger in. There must have been some magic in the jelly guiding me, because when I drew the eye, it looked exactly like the eye that had lured me into the Whiskelet's realm. Remember that the next time you use that china eye you got as a murder object, you'll come to this moment, Mara said. You opened the timeline inside your murder object. When you use it next, you'll find yourself here. Might be useful, I said. Yes, she said dryly. I half expect to see you pop up in the next 30 seconds. You've been an incredible help, I said. Don't mention it. So, I reached out and touched the portal with both fingers. I had enchanted it to take me back to the pawn shop right when I'd left in 1921. But all I could do was hope that this would work, that this wouldn't leave me in worse trouble than I was already in. We hope you've enjoyed Season 3, Episode 5, The Origin of the China Eye, of McGillicuddy and Murder's Pawn Shop. McGillicuddy and Murder's Pawn Shop is written and performed by Minerva Sweeney Wren, all rights reserved. Have you ever wished that you could make your enemies be quiet? Well, the new magic formula from SPC allows you to whisk your acquaintances into a cocoon when they are shouting on public transit, so everyone can finish their commute in peace. To release your acquaintances from this cocoon, hang on, are you hearing an advertisement right now for enemy swooping cocoons? You are not. Do you know why? Because this podcast is free and always will be. This podcast is advertisement free and always will be. However, there is a unique opportunity awaiting you if you become a $1 patron. Minerva Sweeney Wren hopes to start a second podcast called The Dark and Decrepit Planet of Spin, where, instead of merely listening each week, you will solve real puzzles and make real choices that determine the outcome of the tale. Think of it as an enormous collaborative storytelling adventure. For more information, please go to patreon.com/SweeneyWren. Please consider sharing this podcast with your friends. A post on the audiodrama subreddit, an in-person recommendation, or a social media share do more to market this audiodrama than anything Minerva Sweeney Wren can do on her own. She relies on you. McGillicuddy and Murder's Pawn Shop will continue with Season 3, Episode 6. Something savage this way comes.